go. We recognize that the Hogan Administrative Center occupies the land of the Ho-Chunk people. Please take a moment to celebrate and honor this ancestral Ho-Chunk land and the sacred lands of all indigenous peoples. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Mr. Alberts?
Here.
Mr. Vigneski?
Here.
Ms. Berkedal? Here. Dr. Garcia?
Absent.
Dr. Jimenez?
Here.
Mr. Manka?
Here.
Mr. Newmeister?
Here.
Dr. Sprague?
Here.
Ms. Sukla? Here.
A quorum of the Board of Education is present, so the regularly scheduled meeting of December 9th, 2024 is called to order. And we'll now have the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand and face the American flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Tonight's agenda has previously been distributed to the board, and I'd entertain a motion at this time with a second to approve the agenda as submitted, unless there's a motion to amend.
I make a motion to approve the agenda as written.
Is there a second?
A second.
All right, moved by Mr. Bagnuski, seconded by Mr. Newmeister to approve the agenda as presented. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed. Motion has carried, and we will move on to public speakers. It is the policy of the board to provide at its public meetings an opportunity for individuals to address the board. Comments about individual staff or personnel will not be allowed. Open meeting law prohibits the board from engaging in discussion or responding to matters not included on the agenda. All speakers are reminded that the same policy limits your time to 5 minutes. Pardon me. This limit will be strictly enforced, and if I could ask the superintendent to keep track of the time and to notify the speaker when the time is running out.
I will do so.
Okay, and you'll give a 30-second?
Yep, I've got
Okay.
a little sign.
Perfect. You're also asked to give your name and the school district where you reside at the beginning of your time for the public record. And our first speaker tonight is Abby Kruger.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. My name is Abby Kruger. In School District 1, I live in La Crosse. I have 2 kids that go to Longfellow. One will be at Central next year. I was born and raised in La Crosse, went to Cathedral Grade School, Lincoln, and then graduated from Central in 19. You don't need to know how old I am. Okay, so I moved away for exactly 30 years, came back 2.5 years ago to care for a family member and to get my kids rooted in a great community, in an awesome city with a great educational system. I married somebody in the Air Force. We had lots of moves. So there's one story I want to share with you quickly, an experience we had, because I do think it has a different perspective on the issue of metal detectors. So at one point we were stationed at Joint Base Andrews in Washington, D.C., and we chose to live off base. We lived in Calvert County, Maryland, southern Maryland, in a really nice community called Sunderland, Maryland. Upper class, lots of government workers, military members, high clearances, like crime-free community. And my kids attended Sunderland Elementary there. And we had an unfortunate incident. A very clearly mentally ill man with an assault-style weapon was walking down the road in the direction of our kids' school. He was completely unclothed, and it was the middle of winter. So fortunately, somebody saw him, and the sheriffs responded very quickly. We have an awesome sheriff's department there. And he was apprehended, and a crisis was averted. But then we quickly realized after that that our kids were not safe in the schools, in the elementary schools in that county, because they were built in the 1980s, and they had an open pod format. That was the thing we did back then. And there were no doors on the classrooms, right? So this is an issue. We can't do lockdown drills without doors. It's really unheard of now. This was 2015-16, almost 10 years ago. Today it's unheard of to not have doors and do lockdown drills. It's standard practice. We've accepted it as a society. We like it. We want it. Parents want that. Back then it was kind of weird. So the parents then responded with, we want doors on these classrooms. The fear grew with other shootings that happened in the country that year that were very horrible. We had town hall meetings, school board meetings. The concern grew, turned into anger. We need to act. We need to do this. The only option was really to retrofit all these schools with doors, which cost millions. But they decided they were going to divert funds because what happened was enrollment started to drop. Because the word gets out very quickly. Calvert County is a safe place, but there's no doors on the classrooms. What's the threat today? School shootings. That's the threat. So they happen randomly. It's not an inner city problem, it's an everywhere problem. As we just learned a couple weeks ago, at Central High School we had a scare. So they decided to divert funds from a project they were doing. It was like a boardwalk with a bike lane and something else. And they said this is more important because this is what's bringing tax-paying families, responsible working families into our community, safety. So they just coughed it up. They paid it. Millions of dollars, they did it. Enrollment began to increase, okay? Came back. The pillars of the community, still there, county, still creating all this tax revenue. So when we talk about metal detectors now, do we have them in high schools across the country? Yes, we do. Are they becoming standard practice? They are. Do they work? Yeah. Are they psychologically damaging to our kids? No. Our kids, by the time they're in middle school, know that school shootings are happening. They know that they happen with increasing frequency today. They know that we can't agree on how to fix it. They want them. We like metal detectors. When we go to sporting events or the courthouse, whatever it is, we feel good when we walk through them. So do the kids. They like them, they want them there. They get used to it in about a week. Does it require additional manpower? Yes. Can those jobs of, running the entryway into the school in the morning, can be filled with some volunteer, like crossing guard volunteers? Yes. So think about it as a return on our investment. Metal detectors cost a fraction of what Calvert County spent. They are not a permanent fixture in your building. You can pick them up and move them if we build a new school. Let's do it. It's a selling point. I'm going to buy a house soon. I absolutely would pick Central High School District over West Salem if Central put in metal detectors. It's a selling point. Okay, think of it as a return on your investment.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Our next item on the agenda is the STEM 101 and Build Your Own Ukulele Kits. And I believe we've got Jessica Ingleson who's going to join us.
Yes, so thankful to celebrate one of our great endeavors in our schools. Thank you, Jessica, for being here.
I brought samples.
Tim wants to play one.
All right, so I thought that I would start, I'll start with my name, Jessica Ingvelson. I work at Northside Elementary and Cooley Montessori. And what was that, 2 years ago, another music person in the community was like, hey, I'm making these really cool ukuleles, and I wanted to know more. I looked up STEM 101, and immediately I knew I needed to get on their list because I'm like, my kids are going to love these. I included their mission statement because it perfectly sums up what the purpose of STEM 101 is and what I am trying to incorporate in my classroom. And they're a nonprofit. They work to advance economic development by improving STEM literacy skills for all students. Their approach is designed to improve underrepresented minority and low-income student growth, close achievement gaps, decrease dropout rates, increase high school graduation rates, and improve teacher and principal effectiveness. Essentially, that part alone of their mission statement had me at hello. I was like, all right, I'm contacting them, we're doing this. So how do we do this? Well, this is where the Ashley Foundation comes in and the Ronald and Joyce Wyneck Foundation. These kits that I have been using in my classroom the last 2 years have been at no cost due to both of those organizations. The only thing that I had to do this year that was different was write a grant for the Ronald and Joyce Wyneck Foundation, mainly because they're growing. The people keep hearing about STEM 101. They want in on this really great thing. And so some of the processes are changing, but once again, these kits are worth it. And I will get more into that later. What do the kids have to do? Well, the only things that they're required to do is a pre and post survey. It's 100% anonymous. It literally says like student 1042 would like to be an engineer one day. They think that might take 4 years. Usually we don't tell the third graders that's not true. But it's questions like that. And then as they go on as fifth graders, for me it's interesting seeing how their idea of what they want to be and do when they grow up changes, because I'm asking them all these questions in this survey. However, it also asks them questions in a quiz specific to their kit. And I just did one today, and it asks questions like, what is the purpose of the tuning peg? What is the purpose of the body of the ukulele? So it's using everything that they learned throughout the project and just doing a nice summary. It's 8 questions long. It took, I think, 1 minute for each fifth grader to do it. It's 100% worth having a kit covered for free by one of these wonderful foundations. And honestly, they just want these things to be done so they know the kits are being used. It's essentially what it is. So what kits are there? I thought I'd let you know there's more than just ukuleles, and because my fourth graders have been asking me since October when they get to make their speakers. Yes, they make speakers. Yes, they do work. Are they maybe the most pleasant for parents to listen to? Probably not, but the kids are proud because they made them. They took the white magnet wire, they wound it themselves, learned how to make the inner workings of a speaker. It's pretty cool. Fourth graders are doing this. There's also an electronic circuits kit where kids get to take copper tape and batteries and lights and learn how all of that works. An Arduino kit where they actually program to do, I think it's like 5 or 6 different things with this one board. Honestly, even for me, it's a little complicated, so I'm super impressed with them. The hydroponics, which for Northside and Cooley Montessori is even more fitting since we just added the greenhouse. The kids get to grow a plant, but then they also have to learn how much plant food that plant needs at different stages. Because something I didn't know as a non-plant person is that they don't need the same amount throughout the whole process. Now you know. There's also a measurement kit, and last year the kids used the multimeters to test all of the batteries that teachers were unsure of in their classrooms to see if they were working or not. So it was all of these kits we found ways to incorporate very thoughtfully, and the kids just look forward to doing them. I forgot one on there. There's a building systems one too. They get to build a building out of styrofoam, and there's a sensor on the inside. They can do humidity tests with it. And then it pops up on their iPad, and they can see how their building is doing throughout the day. So, yeah. So I also thought I'd show you what inside the portal looks like. So I did one for the ukuleles, just so that people can see what that looks like. So here we see the kids would log in. This is what the kids see. Pre-unit survey, there's 3 different mentors, and they're live mentors. They're real people that the kids get to hear from, so they get to hear how people are actually using these skills in the workforce. And there's different content knowledge, so that's where they talk about the vibrations in the ukulele. What do the strings do? What is the purpose of all of this? It even gets into like a little bit of basic level physics of an acoustic instrument. Then we get to the project instructions, breaks it down super simple. And then the end is that certification piece that I talked about earlier. So what does that content knowledge piece look like? I took a picture. So it has a lot of different things. It actually talks them through what an assembly line is and why they were created. Talks about Henry Ford's assembly line, so that they can learn how using what you know in slightly different ways can actually make you more efficient. And they've actually used this in my classroom, where one kid realizes, I'm really good at using a screwdriver, so if you're really good at hot gluing, let's use each other's skills. And they do. And these are things that I don't tell them to do. I tell them to try the main activity, but then they start to realize, oh, we could use the assembly line technique. And the creative thinking is remarkable. Here is what it looks like when the kids go through each step. So if, say, I had a sub or someone was gone, or I got a call and had to step out, they can still do all of this without me, because it also shows them these nifty videos. So it goes through each step. So the kids that need to read directions can read them. The kids that need to see the directions can see them. And they can pause it whenever they need to pause it. Here I just took a picture of like what one of the questions looked like. So we did talk about dry fitting, because we have to do that with part of the ukulele, because it literally comes in, like this whole thing comes in pieces. It all fits in a little box, and they put all this together. This is the most frustrating but funny part for me. The students learn how to use a screwdriver and to put the tuning pegs in. By the time they're done, they are so excited to take that screwdriver home and find things to tighten up at home. I almost feel like I have to send a disclaimer saying, hey, your kids have a Phillip head screwdriver. Watch out, but things won't be loose anymore. But they're beyond excited now that they know how to use this tool, because what are our kids used to doing? Tapping, tapping screens. They forget how to use the dexterity of something as simple as a screwdriver. So that's why this is awesome. So why do I love this? I love this. I've kind of talked about it a little bit, but the kids get really, like, they get thoughtful, and they start tweaking things in their head, thinking like, oh, the glue is too thick here, so I need to find a way to fix that. They used to come up to me and give me this look like, you gonna fix this, Miss I? And now what they do is they come up to me and say, so what do you think if I pry that off and scrape some of that glue down and then put some new glue on there, just because I don't think that's going to work. Completely different than what they did before. Or they'll get to the part where they put the strings on and they're like, that's not supposed to touch, is it? Nope. So then we talk through ways that they could raise different parts of their ukulele without dismantling the whole thing. So it's just getting their brains going in a different way that previously they weren't doing. My unintended benefit, some of my rambunctious classes are the most silent. The day that Nick Marcoux was in taking pictures, the classroom was quiet. All you heard were screws being accidentally dropped, and then screwdrivers, and an occasional because these screws are really tiny, so they would drop them. But that's all you heard. And this was normally a class that was very talkative. So, and then what did some of the students do? Some of my students that are underachieving are all of a sudden finishing this first and then going around and helping everyone else. And that's something they normally wouldn't do. So all of a sudden you're looking around at them like, you the same kid? And that's what I love about these, is I see different parts to my students that I honestly, without them, would have never seen. So, students, they are more than excited to dive in. The ones that know that these projects exist, the second they come in, they're like, Miss I, are we doing that yet? Have we started? No, not yet. I don't even have them in the building. But they already want to know when they're starting them because they're that excited. So, what are some other kids excited about? I had one kid tell me that her older sibling has a ukulele. She's excited to take it home so that they can play together. Another one said she was excited because her mom couldn't afford to buy her a ukulele, but it doesn't matter because she made one, which is cooler. That's quite literally what she told me. So, So and even the kids with the speaker kits, I had one student who was like, I'm so excited to take this back to my classroom and rock out all day to it. I'll have to forewarn their teachers, I think, about that one as well. But the cool thing about these kits and why I am hoping, at least I'm going to continue doing what I need to do to provide these for my kids as long as I can, is because it's helping them to develop critical thinking skills, using their hands, not just tapping a screen. And I'm watching their brains and the way they're thinking and communicating with each other change. And it's remarkable, quite honestly, and it's exciting. And how cool is it to say that, like, you made a ukulele in school, because this is another one. So I put a couple pictures in so we could see those. This is from last year's 5th grade. You can see how intently they are focusing, screwing in those pegs. Each design is a little different because I give them paint and stain. The stain was actually donated by the Sherwin-Williams on the north side. So kudos to them. Couldn't have done that part without them either. And then this is this year's. So as you can see, very similar. You can see the focus. And this happens all the way through, like even today, they're sitting there, and when they learned that they could play songs like Ho Hey and Roar by Katy Perry, all of a sudden the ukulele became that much cooler. Not even kidding. One of these kids on there was like, what? So honestly, I'm very thrilled that I was able to have this opportunity by STEM 101. I am super excited I was able to share what this project is doing in my classroom with all of you. And honestly, I could keep going, but because every piece of these projects it's done so many wonderful things in our school. So thank you.
And this is all done in music class, right?
Yes, the ukuleles and the speakers are, yes. The other kits are done through STEAM Lab, or kind of to replace some of the HPL time that doesn't happen as HPL time. And then I have a couple teachers who needed an extension on their science curriculum, so they asked for like some of the hydroponics and those kits. So I kind of dispersed them. So.
Questions and comments from the board? Ms. Suko?
As a parent of a lacrosse student whose career is in STEM, she's an architectural engineer, I'm always excited to hear about these programs. And so thank you for what you're doing, and it's very clear, like, everybody talks at this table about this generation likes to do and be involved and have their hands involved, so I can imagine the excitement that happens in your classroom.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned to become an engineer in 4 years. That happened.
It can, yes. I was just thinking of a family member that I have, and it's taken my family member a tad bit longer. But yes, but you're correct. Yeah, it can.
So it can happen.
It is possible. Yes, 100%. It is possible.
The other point, and it's a minor point, but I want to clarify because Ron and Joyce were neighbors of a family member of mine, so it's W-A-N-E-K.
Okay.
Wanek is how it's pronounced. So
Okay.
I just wanted to be clear and give them the recognition.
Yes.
I'm sure Ashley's very excited about this because they want to grow a workforce that does hands-on things, so.
Yep, and I do know that Ronald and Joyce are also, because I met with Ashley today, and she had the representative had told me they are very, very compassionate in giving and very interested in this program and what it brings to schools as well.
Very generous
So,
people, yes.
Absolutely.
Other questions or comments?
I think it's on. Okay, hi. I know you mentioned that you talked a little bit about the things that you had to do as a requirement of the grant for follow-up, and that it makes it 100% worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I think you deserve a huge kudos for going through the steps and the effort it takes to submit grant requests and do the follow-up and do things like put this presentation together for our board. And it's clear that your students are gaining a massive impact from your efforts, and I just Thank you. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Good point.
Mr. Newmeister?
I'd like to go off that a little bit. First off, you said the passion it's showing. I think the passion is obviously with the teacher that's giving those out because you can see it in you, and you're obviously take a lot of pride in this. And it's remarkable that we're able to do this for the kids, and so thank you for everything you're doing.
Yeah, thank you.
Anything else? I guess the only question I have for you is, could you talk a little bit about any types of partnerships you have with other teachers within the Northside building and how this project can help benefit those partnerships?
Yeah. So, so our librarian, who also runs the STEAM lab, partnered with her, and she's remarkable. She is like all over the Arduino kits, which is fantastic. And she also incorporates every time the kids come in for STEAM lab, or when she does extra activities with the students that are more hands-on during that library time, she'll bring out some of those kits to work with the student on. So like last year, I walked in, they were doing a building systems one, they were learning the circuits. She is the one who helped them test the batteries. They're all sectioned off by teacher, and so we know that all those work now, which is delightful. Partnered with the Cooley Montessori E2 team to help enrich and expand their 6th grade curriculum. And I think this year they're using the Arduino kit and hydroponics and measurement kits are the 3 that they're going to use in their classrooms. And then the remaining kits, our coordinator in our building, our community coordinator, is helping with it because she's helping to implement those during intersession for the smaller groups of students that are there that could benefit from a more hands-on project. So she helps to figure out what teacher would be a great fit for a kit that has some extras and that's not being used by other teachers. And she works diligently on getting those out to those kids.
Wonderful.
So, yeah.
Any final thoughts or comments from the board? Hearing none.
you.
Thank you very
so
much.
much. Yeah,
Thank you,
thank you.
appreciate it. All right, the next item on our agenda is the approval of the superintendent's consent agenda. So the consent agenda is a mechanism that is used by the board to deal with routine business that comes before the body. Are there any items that the members want to remove from the consent agenda? Ms. Supla.
I'd like to remove the Act 143 as well as the architectural memo.
Okay. Any others? All right, so let's proceed, and we will move to approve the HR approvals and the Logan High School Bleacher Project Award. Is there a motion to that effect?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay. All right, moved by Mr. Newmeister, seconded by Mr. Manka to approve the HR approvals and the Logan High School Bleacher Project Award of Construction bid. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion is carried. Let's start with the Act 143 requirements by the Department of Justice. Ms. Supla, you wanted to pull those off?
Yeah, I just think it's important that the public know a little bit more about this. Would Superintendent Engel just be able to give us a little summary of what this is about? 'Cause I think
We
it's an
are
important
fortunate to
piece.
have the subject matter expert here. If Mr. Levine or Ms. Endres would want to come up and just chat a little bit about this requirement, that would be great.
Good evening.
What can I help with?
I just was looking for a summary so the public knows what it is that we're approving this evening, why this document's important for us to improve.
Sure. The Act 143 basically is, it's the school violence drill, which is, we talked about this, the hold, secure, lockdown. Each school is required to do a hold or a standard response protocol, which is what this is, every semester in the fall semester and the spring semester. And this report, or this drill, is the report that goes with that. And then I submit that to DPI.
So we're certifying through this process that we've met the requirements of Act 143 to
Exactly.
conduct these safety drills in accordance with the law. And I'm thankful for Ms. Endress for keeping track of all of this, because
Sure.
it's there's a lot of schools and a lot of things going on, and making
Yeah.
sure we check those boxes is important and give the training our students need to be safe.
Exactly.
Anything else?
This is a rather routine matter, but in light of the recent event, I just want the
Sure.
public to be aware of the efforts that are being done by the district. So I'd make a motion to approve the 143 report.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is that, who was that? Okay, thank you. Moved by Ms. Sukla, seconded by Dr. Sprague to approve the Act 143 requirements by the Department of Justice, Office of School Safety. With no other discussion, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion is carried, and we'll move on to the Bray Architectural Report, and I'll turn it over to Ms. Sukla again. You wanted to pull this off the agenda.
Sure. There's a lengthy discussion at the last meeting about getting bids, and again, just wanted to provide some more information for the public to follow up on that discussion on what the administration has done.
Absolutely. So we provided an updated memo to talk about our process. The school district recommends continuing with Bray Architects for architectural services for the elementary school updates. Just like any other business or school district, once we found a quality, affordable service or product, we continue with that same chosen resource without rebidding for that service or product. And the reasons are many, but we continue with that chosen resource because there's substantial benefits in maintaining continuity and familiarity when we're satisfied with the outcome. A great example is with our Skyward Student Information System software. It's an expensive software program that we have to use to manage all of our student information. We could bid it out every year and use a different student information system each year. The ramifications for our school district it would be devastating to try and do that on an annual basis. You generally find a product that you're satisfied with, and you continue to work with that product, year over year. And when you make a change like that, it will be the only thing you think about for months or years in some cases. And so there's lots of different things on different scales, right? Where we've identified a great partner, we've chosen a product, typically through a bidding process, and we continue to work with that service or product continuously into the future. Other examples are student and staff devices, varieties of software, legal services, waste management, cleaning supplies, property insurance, health insurance, restorative justice services, after-school programs, law enforcement, educational materials, lots of different things. And of course, we always reserve the right to go to bid or choose another product or another service if we're unsatisfied with those services. And there's times when we're just not sure that we're getting the value that we need to. We go out to bid regularly for auditor services because we know that there's a large variety in the costs for some of those services over time. On occasion, we've been unsatisfied with a product or a service in our community, and we've gone to bid to see if we can find something else that's better. And sometimes we're just not certain of rates, costs, inflation, we're not sure where things are at. And so we go to bid to make sure that we're providing the best value for our community. So we bid out architectural services in 2012 for the Northside Elementary project, and we've been working continuously with Bray Architects since then on numerous projects. And both Joe and I could talk at length about the positive interactions we've had and how they've supported us through numerous projects, referendum processes, and been fully satisfied with the quality of the work and continuously with their competitive rates. And, as we think about, potentially going to bid on some of these things when we are satisfied, when we do know that the rates are good, it starts to cause some question. We don't know what types of bids we'll get, if others think it's a performative process, like, oh, they already work with that group, so why would I even bid? And it could create an unfavorable impression of the school district, potentially, if people think it's performative as well or perfunctory. Bray Architects has been instrumental in all of the preliminary design work and estimates for this elementary upgrade, as well as support through the referendum process. We want to ensure we are still providing the best value, and the results of our rate analysis indicate that Bray's rates continue to remain competitive. In addition to offering competitive pricing that assures the best value is obtained for the district, their ongoing successful work and familiarity with the district warrant a continuation of a relationship with Bray Architects for this project. Happy to field any questions around that.
Well, we didn't get bids. You've gotten some ideas of what rates were charged for other school projects at different times. Even a 0.5% difference is about $270,000, which pays for probably about 3 staff. So even a tiny change like that is a substantial amount of money. The last time we got a bid was 12 years ago. We were told at the last meeting that we had a great architect we were working with at the time. I think we had a good relationship with them, but we went to bid because we had a building project, and we got a number of bidders. So I think to say that, I don't know why the suggestion that it'd be performative was thrown out there. I really wish we would have gone to bid. I think that's the right thing to do. It's the fair thing to do. It's no representation on the work that Bray does any more than a dozen years ago. It was a representation of the work that that architect did. I am disappointed that for a project this big, for this much money, we didn't go and get bids. I get why you don't do bids on some other things for the district, but it's unclear to me why we could do it 12 years ago and now we can't do it.
Other comments from board members?
I have one for this. I too question it a little bit. I do understand that you're loyal to them and they're loyal to you. But my concern is you'd brought up that they start to question why we go out for bids and might other architects may or may not, but our taxpayers also question it, I would assume. So I think we really need to be careful on to make sure, and I'm not saying you're not, and I'm sure you're fully aware of where the bids may fall, but I think putting them out for bids is the right thing to do. I know the city does it every time they build something. And I think, which, it was brought up, if it's a smaller project, totally understand it, but this is a big venture, and I think we owed it to not only other architects, but also our taxpayers to make sure that we are getting not only the best value, but the best price. And even if it's close and you choose Bray, that's fine. But at least we're doing our duty to our taxpayers to make sure we're getting the best deal.
I'd only push it back on the loyal comment. Loyalty is not an issue here. It's about the best service and the best value, and that's why we continue to work with them.
Okay, and I wasn't saying that you're thinking that. I could have swore you said that others will question why we're going out for bids. That's why I'm
absolutely.
saying, that's what I meant by the loyalty part. Why would they question it? The loyalty is still with Bray or whomever, but I think going out for bids is just the normal thing to do for any city government or most companies for that fact.
And I would say it's not always the case with schools. I'd say maybe half, but once you've usually picked a partner, that's who you work with long term. And in most school districts I've been in, if you're satisfied with the services that you've received from a construction management firm, from a contractor, from an architectural firm, the standard practice, in my experience, has been to continue to work with that same partner because they know your history, they have all the background knowledge, the startup time's a lot lower, and they're able to be that continuing, ongoing partner. It's like with legal services. We could pick a different legal firm every year, but then when I call on the next thing, I've got to start over from scratch. It's going to take me 45 minutes to give them the background on a human resources issue that could have taken 10 minutes. And now I've cost the taxpayers more money. And so these savings that you anticipate, they may not come to fruition because we're going to have all this startup cost with a new partner that we're working with. And so I certainly want to ensure that we're providing the best possible outcome for our taxpayers. But part of that involves continuity with the provider.
Dr. Sprague?
And I would just confer that I think it's good to have a number of bids in front of you so that you can assure the taxpayer that you're doing your due diligence. I mean, I agree with what you said, but at the same time, having another company come in and place a bid, I don't see that that's harmful. Matter of fact, it would protect our reputation, I guess.
Dr. Sprague?
I can see the concern as well. I mean, at the last meeting, I voiced the same thing, that our process calls for, you know, going to bid in these kinds of situations. I also recognize, I think, the significant investment that Bray has already made in this particular project, that the familiarity they have with it, with our needs and our expectations. So Aaron, Dr. Engel, excuse me, my question for you would be, what would it look like if there were a compelling reason, like if absent the bidding process, how do we identify when there is a compelling reason to choose a different provider or switch services?
So one would be rates, right? So our understanding of the rates in the area. We're fortunate to have a great network of contacts as superintendents, as facility managers and directors, to talk with our peers, and we give phone calls like, hey, how did things go with your architect? How did things go with your construction management firm? What were the rates that you got? And we share those freely with each other because we're all interested in what's best for kids, for our communities. And so we know the rates that are out there for projects, and we have that assessment right up front. You know, we don't need to go to bid to understand what a project of similar size or scope was bid at. We know what was bid in our communities. And then it's a matter of the quality of the service that's provided. We've had services provided to the school district in a variety of areas, and I hesitate to get into specific names and circumstances because I'm not trying to, you know, undermine the business of people in our community. But when we're not satisfied, we choose a different direction. And, you know, Joe Ledvina can certainly speak to probably half a dozen circumstances where we've gone out to bid to seek something else. And it could be anything on this list of things that I've identified that we have either continued with or gone back out to bid over time. We've chosen different software, we've chosen different educational materials, we've chosen different waste management providers over time. All of these contracts in sum add up to well over $100,000 while we're working with them, or even in a given year as it relates to like a student information system. You know, so if we're unhappy, we absolutely seek something out. If we're satisfied and it's meeting our needs and we know that our rates are competitive, we continue with it because the cost of disruption is substantial. And it would be needless to incur that cost on our staff, on our schools, on our community, on our taxpayers.
Other comments?
When you say substantial, what does that mean, cost to be substantial?
If we, let's say that our project got delayed a month and a half, you know, in order to go to bid. Be questionable, you know, then whether or not we're able to complete our transfer out of Hogan over to Central in a timely fashion. We might not be able to demolish this building, you know, before winter. Maybe our winter conditions now have increased the cost for that while they have to put in foundations through tarping and heaters, and that adds up. It's a $10,000 here, $40,000 there, and next thing you know, you've spent an extra $200,000 in costs that would not have to have been incurred if we had an efficient process from the start, working with a company that we trust and rely on and know provides a good value to our school district.
Dr. Sprague?
So, Mr. Ledvina, I had asked in the last meeting when we were talking about that 5% versus 7.5%, some of those rates. Do you have some concrete examples you could give us in comparison, just to do?
We did. I think the superintendent sent those out in
Yeah.
an email. We were reluctant to share them.
No,
I will say this, and it's very important to say, is that Bray was instrumental in the process of us even going to referendum. And so we made no mistake about that during our referendum presentations that we were working with our architect, Bray. The integrity of the process is really important. The other thing I do want to tell you is that we wouldn't be going out for bid. We'd be doing an RFP, a request for proposal. There's so much more than just the percentage that we're talking about. We're talking about bid submittals, right? We're talking about that process. We're talking about bid specifications and how many addendums go out. We're talking about change orders. A good example would be with Bray at the Northside Elementary School. We had 5 change orders. In those 5 change orders, we saved $150,000. Okay, when we did the Hamilton addition, we had 0 change orders. When we did the office addition at Central, we had 2 change orders, mainly because we changed the scope of the work during the process, thinking we wanted something a little different. And so there's a lot more that goes into the RFP. I want to be very careful as we talk about that than the bid process, because there's so much more that can cost you money in the process. When you talk in terms of even putting out the bid specs and the process, and then how many addendums do occur between now and when you get the bids in.
And I
so
think
all those things are a major part of what they cost you money in the long run, so it's not just that percentage.
I think Joe's talking about change orders just to demonstrate that the design that Bray has provided is the design that we went with, and oftentimes we were able to save money. They were, transparent about their process and met our needs up front, so there weren't like hidden costs later on. And so we know that we trust them to work through these projects. And if that's the case and their rates are competitive, it would take a monumental demonstration of quality for us to even consider changing when we have this strong partnership who's already demonstrated success on project after project after project. If you've got a plumber at your house that you use consistently, and you trust them, they diagnose things well, they make the changes you need, and you've used them for 10 years, you might be able to get a cheaper rate with somebody else, but are you gonna take the risk when you've got the person you trust and the rates are competitive?
One of the things we did in 2012, when we did the architect RFP, we had not built a building in 20 years, so it was the first time we had done any really major. We did the addition at State Road School. We used a different architect firm. They did a fine job, but we thought there were some areas they could improve in, so we did the RFP with that. The product was still good, but we had some things that, in construction management, things that could have been better, and so we went to that RFP. But the main reason we did that is because we hadn't done any major construction in the district for over 20 years.
Anything else?
Yeah, I would just say that as far as the timeline, when we built the Northside School, it was approved in November. We did get bids, and the building was done in time, so there wasn't the process of moving like this. And quite frankly, if Bray did this project, moving Central and the other two big pieces of the State Road and the new building were done under bids, I think might make some sense. But we got it done in time. And yeah, at home, we do things differently than a government entity does. We have a lot of different rules than what we use at home, so of course, that would be a different type of decision.
Absolutely, and I would argue that we are complying with our rules. We have gone to bid to select this architect, and much like many other services in our school district, we're recommending continuation of that same service as we move forward.
I think the only thing I would add to this conversation is that I struggle with the conversation as a whole in that I hear the concern regarding going to bid, but I also hear in the conversation what seems to be a question about the trust or integrity of our administration. They are experts. They understand the work. They've been part of this district for a long time. They are definitely here for the students, for the community, to ensure safety, to ensure quality. So I also think we need to consider, are these questions on integrity, or are they truly questions of curiosity? And I think that we as a board, and me included, needs to re-examine what is our purpose as board members, what is our work, what work is within our scope, what is the work within the scope of the administration. We hold the administration accountable based upon policy. And so at this point, I just would ask the board members to really reconsider what the purpose of the questions are, why we are focused so deeply on minutia, as opposed to focusing on the policy, which is the work that is done at this board level.
I find it offensive that you are suggesting our questions are anything other than we're trying to do due process and do what the public expects us to do in being very open and transparent.
I appreciate that. I also think our administration finds it offensive with the types of questions we've been asking for the last 6 months or more. So that's why I raise it. Any other questions or comments?
I was one of the folks who was curious about the whole bid thing with an architect last week. I appreciate the table that you sent that showed the different districts around our county and what they've seen as rates recently. As I recall, I think only Onalaska had a very slightly lower rate than what Bray is proposing. I mean, I guess I see both sides, and I do feel like it is a genuine, just like the, maybe, you know, part of our responsibility as board members to ensure that we're being fiscally responsible. And yet at the same time, Joe brought up a good point that when we had all of our referendum information sessions, at quite a few of them, we did acknowledge to folks who were asking that we were intending to use Bray as the architect. So I don't know. I mean, I personally feel comfortable moving forward with Bray. I think the value that we gain by going with somebody that we've worked with so many times and have a strong working relationship with, and we don't need to catch them up to speed with what our values are. I think that that's a value add enough that it doesn't bother me that Onalaska was 0.2% lower than Bray's bid or something like, yeah, I don't remember what it was exactly, but this is a big deal project, and it's great to work with somebody that we trust. So I would vote to,
Well, I would agree with you. I think I appreciate the procedural question because it's important to be checking ourselves. But I think absent a compelling reason or evidence that we're unsatisfied with their work, that we have reason to believe a better value is out there. And that's why I know we had the percentages in front of us, but is there some reason we don't want to share them publicly? That's fine. But yeah, but if we're reasonably assured that the standard of service that we've been receiving is what's going to continue and that it is competitive on the market, I think that the value gained in continuing that relationship and in moving our projects forward satisfies the public concern that we're being fiscally responsible.
and we would go to bid for the construction part, right?
Right.
Absolutely. Yep. There's enough variability when it comes to construction costs, and there's so many different ways that those services can be provided. That is an area we will definitely be going to bid. We still have to evaluate how exactly we want to tackle that, but there's a lot of different people in our community and broader that could provide a lot of these services. I know one of the things we were proud about with Northside or Hamilton was preference for local work, try and keep people in our community employed, and that's one of the nice things we can approach with a bidding process is to seek that out because there are so many quality builders in our area.
Any other comments?
I would move to approve the Bray Architectural Services Continuation Memo number 2.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Moved by Ms. Birkendahl, seconded by Dr. Sprague to approve the Bray Architectural Services Continuation Memo number 2. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay.
Motion is carried, and we'll move on to the board consent agenda. Is there a motion on this?
I move to approve the items on the board consent agenda as presented.
Is there a second? Second. Moved by Ms. Birkendahl, seconded by Mr. Alberts to approve the items on the board consent agenda as presented. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion has carried, and we'll move on to the matters reserved for board action. The first being Operational Expectation Monitoring Report OE4 Personnel Administration. And at this point, we have already heard this report, and so we are just making a motion to either mark that we are in compliance with exceptions noted, or not in compliance. Is there a motion on OE4?
In regard to the monitoring report for policy OE4, personnel administration, and with respect to the provisions of policy BSR 5, superintendent accountability, the Board of Education concludes that the superintendent and district are in compliance with exceptions noted. I make the motion so stated.
Thank you.
I forgot the first part of that.
Nope, you did great. So moved by Dr. Sprague. Is there a second?
A second.
Okay, so moved by Dr. Sprague, seconded by Mr. Bagneski to approve OE4 to be in compliance with exceptions noted, as Dr. Sprague stated. Any discussion on this item? Yes, sir.
I don't know if this falls in line there, but do we have any, I don't know, I'm going to say minority report in terms of, if it's talking about staffing, how many minorities do we have in the district working for us?
Great question, and I think that's something we cover. Let me see if I can find it. I know that that is an area that the school district has wanted a representative school district, right? So as a child, when you come into our schools, you can see yourself in our staff. One of the challenges that we find with that particular representation
Indicator
question.
3 under OE 4.3. Racial diversity will continue to increase from a baseline of 5.7 toward its
yes.
desired intermediate goal of 10%.
So our goal is set at 10% because that's the percentage of the adult population in our community that is of color or identifies as of color, even though our student population is 30%. And so we would love, to have a representative staff that met that 30% threshold, but when we're recruiting against a base of 10%, that's kind of where we're at for right now. We'd like to achieve that, and we're on our way, and we've made some progress. Let's see, it was at 5.76% last year. It's at 6.77% this year. To be clear, it is not uniform across staff groups, and I think in our support staff group, the ratio is a little bit higher than our certified teaching staff group. So there's areas of disparity even within there. But certainly a goal and a focus that we have. We're thankful to have continually climbed in that regard, and we're always seeking new processes and procedures that lower the barrier for folks that maybe have been historically excluded from schools, and also to actively recruit folks so that when you're a kid and you walk into our building, you see yourself here. So something that we're proud of the progress that we're making, and we also know that we have a ways to go.
Years ago, in the old days, we used to have, like, I'm going to call it a minority coordinator, a person of color that would come in and sometimes talk to groups of students and so on. And I know that there were different times, for instance, if the student was saying that there was a problem here, this person would step in and really kind of look at both sides and let you know what's going on in his or her mind. So we don't have that position any longer, do we?
It may maybe have transitioned over the years. What we have now are what are called cultural family liaisons, a wonderful program that we've had through Fund 80 for many years. Mr. Tony Yang has been one of the stalwarts of that program, connecting our Hmong community to our school district. And we've had a series of great folks who identify as Black or Hispanic serve in the other role. And right now we have a wonderful teacher in Ms. Laura Avalara, who helps coordinate that program as well. So we have two folks in our school district who have helped support those
Good.
family cultural connections.
Good. Unaware of that.
Any other conversation? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed. The motion is carried, and we'll move on to Results Monitoring Report R2, Academic Performance. And is there a motion in regard to this one, whether we are making reasonable progress toward the achieving desired results, making reasonable progress with exceptions noted, or failing to make reasonable progress?
Can I try again?
Yes.
I move that, in regard to the monitoring report for policy R2, academic performance, and with respect to the provisions of policy BSR5, superintendent accountability. Am I on the wrong one? No, I am not.
Nope.
The Board of Education concludes that the superintendent and district are making reasonable progress with the exceptions noted.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
So we'll go, moved by Dr. Sprague, seconded by Ms. Berkedal, to approve R2 with making reasonable progress with the exceptions noted. Is there any discussion on this one? Mr.
Well,
Kaminsky?
again, right before the meeting started, we were having kind of a conversation here, and this gives us as a school district, it gives school district people some information, teacher, if they look at it and so on, administrator, but it says like 20% are advanced, 35% are proficient. And I don't know, I've been reading more and more, and as a building principal, I once did this in terms of individualized growth. So we talk about growth of each student. So we could say if we went along, and from what I understand, there's 23 states now doing this, but they would look at it in terms of, hey, listen, 50% of our kids grew from last year to this year. Now, I know the calculations are pretty difficult. Sometimes it's hard for, I'm going to say this, general public to understand all of that, but at the same time, I think it would really be good to take a look at it. I don't know what that all means, and I'm not going to be at the computer figuring it out, but I just think, we used to have bar graphs for every kid in the school, and we give them a reading test. And when the first day of school, they were here. And the second, and then at the quarter break, we'd give them another assessment. Did the student grow or not? And if the student didn't grow, then what are we going to do differently? And so it was really an excellent source of knowledge for the teacher, the student, the parent, and so on. And so if we could start maybe taking a look at the growth type program to say our students are growing in these areas, and we could come back and say 80% of our students grew last year.
Yeah, and I would just say to that before I jump in, Dr. Engel, is that, yes, and as you well know, I always appreciate the conversation of assessment, and, and I'd mentioned that the challenge with the state exams is that we're comparing two different groups of students as opposed to the individual student as you're describing. The results, the way it's written currently as our indicators, use the state exam. So that's why in this report we are stuck with that. But I hear you that I think, you're absolutely right. I think that's a better measure. I think, looking at individual growth is always going to be better. And I think, our faculty are definitely looking at that, but that's the only reason that R2 does not necessarily get to that level. But I
just
think
thought
it's a
this
great
was a
point.
good time to bring it up.
Absolutely, and it's a great
Yep.
point. Dr. Engel? Oh.
Say that again.
We could squeeze our data or one.
Make it
The
less
squishy
squishy.
I've definitely heard from school board members kind of a consistent pattern, interest in maybe slightly different ways to look at achievement data. One thing is within your growth of individual students. That is something that we do track through local assessments that we can provide some information on. Another thing I've heard folks mention is, the 8th grade assessment tracks last year's 8th graders and then compares it to this year's 8th graders. That's not the same cohort of students.
Correct.
It's not 7th graders who are then tested as 8th graders. So I've also heard an interest in cohort data. It takes us a little while to process that, and Mr. Fimright and I are in the process of gathering up those analyses and data, and we intend to provide kind of an interim R2 report to the school board here in the late winter or early winter, well, I don't know, next year. That includes different ways to look at that data, and if the school board is interested, we can then kind of reassess our monitoring indicators here and either make them more robust or, indicate multiple measures will be used or something. So we'll have an opportunity here in the next couple of months to present more robust data like you're talking about, Mr. Begneski, and like others have mentioned at this board table.
And even though it takes time, you're still way faster than the state coming back with their with the test results, which I don't understand this day and age of technology why it takes so long. But
Yeah, we can't even start our analysis until November.
honest.
It's very frustrating. I agree, Ms. Sukla. Thank you.
I was just going to say, I agree with Mr. Begnevsky entirely. I think a both and kind of situation here in terms of our reporting would be really helpful. I think there's usefulness for the district in having the cohort data, although for the public wanting to understand, are our kids achieving, it's less helpful because the comparison is not a clear one, right? Whereas that sense of individual growth, which doesn't always work well with benchmark, settings, but indicates that an individual student, or hopefully all individual students, are succeeding where we want them to be succeeding, and that success is going to look different for many, many, many of our students. I think that would be great to get that picture.
I've also heard an interest in like a cohort. Other school districts kind of like us, and so that'll be some other comparative data that we can bring so that the school board, it's not necessarily fair to compare La Crosse to Bangor, right? Just size, scale, scope, much different. They can have much more variability in a year than we can because we're a much larger entity. And so comparing us to something like Fond du Lac, Wisconsin Rapids, Manitowoc may be of greater value than some of our more regional comparisons, which are a half, a quarter, or an eighth our size.
Not to get super into a rabbit hole on how we're analyzing data, but one of the, since I started, when I first started, we were still seeing 2019 data show up in these results, just because of the span of years that we were grabbing, but now that's fallen off. But I, at the time, found it really helpful to kind of see that pre-COVID marker to compare how far we've come back from that. And is that something you're still looking at?
We still do comparison cohort data. I mean, we can follow a student's all the way through, and we've got a couple systems that are in place to do that. That teachers use that to, basically inform their instruction. So It's not based on the Wisconsin forward exam, it's more based on our universal type, like iReady. We got Ames Web's coming online here too, so, but that's relatively easy data for us to pull. We want to look at growth, we want to look at, you name it, we can generally pull it.
Our challenge as we have progressed through time is the state will change the test, or
They
we
do.
change
Yeah.
the test locally. And so, is it still apples to apples?
Right.
Can be a challenge. And now they've just changed the benchmarks at the state level to make them,
That's right.
it's probably a good change that makes sense on a lot broader scale, but it
Yeah.
means that we can't compare our data to the past 8 years.
Yeah.
So that's frustrating too, especially as a school board that's looking for that progress and that improvement. I think Ms. Sukla is always wise in looking at the gap with the state average as like a way to think about things. We can also maybe look at cohorts, like our cohort, like how are we doing relative to similar school districts, over time. It's like there's a number of ways to tackle that, but they don't make it easy.
Yeah. I think, and just to jump in before.
Well, one of the other advantages of individual growth is because this is about the student. I can convince the student you have to do well, this is your marker here, versus you're taking this test, why do I care? Well, it'll make the school look good. I'm not into the school, I'm into me. And so that motivation type thing might help.
And I think a good point, Dr. Engel, is the point you made regarding that the state has changed benchmarks. Because I remember previous boards around this table talking about what is reasonable progress. And especially during the pandemic times, it was hard to create what we talked about, which was like a 3-year average, and reviewing that trend line and determining whether that trend line was trending correctly the way we wanted it to or not. And so we got deep into the weeds about the word reasonable. So I think that is not something the board should shy away from, is talking about what does it mean to be reasonable, what does this board determine to be reasonable, but I also appreciate that you and the administrative team will be looking at different ways to present data, which will give us a broad picture of the students that we serve and how they are achieving. So I appreciate that. Any other comments on R2, the results monitoring report? Okay. Having said that and hearing no other comments, then I believe the motion was number 2, that we are going to approve this R2 as making reasonable progress with exceptions noted. Am I correct? Okay, so all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion has carried. And just a reminder while we are here that starting in January, as we review operational expectations, unless it is broken up, like usually OE 10 or OE 11 is broken up, we will be talking about and voting on those policies in the same meeting. So we will not have this conversation at one meeting and then voting in another. It will all happen. The thing that will be different, be yet the same, is that even though we will vote on the policy in one meeting, the next meeting is where we'll talk about the intended changes to the policy. So just like we're doing now, we will have that at a different meeting. So that's the only thing that's split. And yes, ma'am.
Just to clarify the process there,
Yes.
so in this last year, we've seen a lot of examples of the administration making suggested changes to the policies, but if we wanted to, what would the process look like for that? Would we just let you know, or is that something we need to talk about in advance?
It would be the same, that at the time that the administration is bringing up changes, the board members can also bring up changes.
Suggestions
So
too.
they can bring them in at the same time. and
So
have
the
that
next
conversation.
week?
Correct. So like, if this was the January 6th is our next meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So at the January 6th meeting, if we were talking about OE 7, for example,
Mm-hmm.
we will hear the presentation, we will vote. And then at the January 27th meeting, we would come back and talk about any intended changes.
So they would always be on the agenda whether the administration had changes or not, just to
Correct.
give us an opportunity to chat?
Correct. In the
Okay.
past, there have been times where the administration had no changes, it was still on there.
Okay.
Just in case.
Okay.
So, yes, definitely, because you never know when a board member might bring one. Sometimes they let me know, sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
So at least we would know that there's a placeholder for the conversation.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate that.
You're welcome. All right, moving on to the information. So this is where we're talking about proposed changes. I believe, other than the general changes that we've been making to all operational expectations, there's no others. Is that correct, Dr. Engel?
That is Correct.
I don't think any of the indicators are changing. It's just the definitions and the interpretations being removed, et cetera.
Definitions and interpretations, that is correct.
Okay. Any conversation from the board regarding those proposed changes?
Just for OE4.
This is for OE4. Any questions or concerns? Okay. Hearing none, then we'll move on to results monitoring report R2. And here, we do have not only changes to definitions and the superintendent interpretation, but we do have changes to the indicators, I believe, starting with R2.2. So if I can turn it over to either Dr. Engel or Mr. Fimright to discuss those.
Yeah, so like the other monitoring reports, R2, we took out the interpretations, updated the definitions to more relevant and clearer expectations for students' performance. There was a few tweaks made to the language in R2.2, indicator 1 through 3, and then indicator 2.2, indicator 1 through 3. The language was adjusted to consistently align with expectations for all indicators with the board and superintendent accountability, and to improve and enhance the readability for the stakeholders.
So my understanding of the change is just we removed increase over the prior year to be demonstrate reasonable achievement or growth.
Yeah.
Say more.
Yes, I was going to say, please.
We're back to reasonable progress, which always feels like
Well-
like, I thought we changed it from reasonable progress to increase, because when the language is demonstrate reasonable progress, and I'm looking at the data, I am looking for an increase from 1 year to the next. So,
That could definitely be an indication of reasonable progress. And let's say, I mean, we're going to talk about like multiple measures too, right? So like, let's say there's like 4 different ways to look at it. There's annualized growth, there's cohort data, and there's academic achievement data. What does reasonable progress look like then if it's different with different things? Another thing might be, it didn't increase over the last year, but our 4-year trajectory continues to be upwards. And so we're still 10 points over 4 years ago, but maybe there was a spike 1 year on our state achievement data because a cohort of students who took it was particularly engaged that year. And
Yep.
so the longer term trend shows progress. You might want to say, yeah, we're headed in the right direction. 1 year down doesn't mean we're going down forever.
Right.
1 year up doesn't mean like it's going to go on forever.
right, it just makes it a little bit more up to interpretation. So having
Totally,
that context
it's
around
more
it.
It's on us,
squishy.
I think. And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
brought mine out to make the point.
Oh, totally.
I think, as I remember the discussion, the demonstrating reasonable achievement or growth gave us the flexibility to determine that. And
Yeah.
the intra-cohort data, I think, that achievement data that you mentioned, like, we're at a point where if what we're looking for is just percentile growth year over year, we're going to have a challenge with that as our cohort sizes change with our demographic trends. The possibility for more significant, not sampling error, but you're a mathematician, you know what I'm saying, right?
And the assessment sometimes changes from year to year too, depending.
Exactly, right.
So it just gives you
Yeah.
guys more ability to.
Right. So
say,
to
have
to
we
Mr.
met this?
Bagneski's point about the last one, being able to see student achievement within, comparing them to themselves year end to the beginning of the year, I think that's where, for my money, I'm going to find reasonable progress being able to look within those, those reference groups.
Yeah, and I think your point is well taken if you have multiple measures, right?
Right.
If you have one measure, which is what we have currently, which is the state assessment exam, maybe the reasonable thing to do is our trend line similar to the state's? And if the state is trending down and we're trending down, are we staying similar to the state? Is that necessarily reasonable growth or not, right? So just because the trend line is going in the wrong direction, quote unquote, in the negative direction, does not necessarily mean it's not reasonable growth, given trend. So, I mean, it's squishy, it is challenging, but it's the beauty of assessment and multiple measures. That's why it signals that multiple measures is the best way to go.
Well,
That-
that-
Oh,
Oh,
sorry.
it's the indicator 1 for R2.3, we indicated that we did not meet reasonable progress, largely because we had overcounted things in the past. And so when we modified that for the current, when it says we'll increase over the prior year, we did not do that. But it's because we increased our hurdle for that year. We think it'll swing back the next year because it'll be an apples to apples comparison again, but with a squishier opportunity, then the board could say like, is reasonable achievement. We understand that this thing happened, and we're willing to overlook that for a year. If it doesn't continue next year, we would have to, be more serious about it. But when it says increase over prior year, we couldn't honestly say that happened.
And I think that flexibility is important as we, learned several years ago, a once in a lifetime pandemic throws a huge wrench in our statistics. And so our ability to account for at the board table what's going on in the world that is impacting our students, the burden is on us, absolutely. But I think that's where it belongs, right? To make that interpretation and to provide that oversight.
I would say I have some of the similar concerns that Ms. Berkedal has, but I can't remember which report it was, but again, because of the way the language was written, it was about the increase, and it wasn't our fault, the staff's fault, and so we had to say that there were exceptions, and that's certainly frustrating for staff. For a year, I'd be willing to give this a whirl. I guess let's see what happens in a year, and maybe a year from now, we want to go back to.
We'll be right back here. Yeah.
I mean, but I think it's worth looking and giving it a year's try. I'm okay with that.
And I also believe, Dr. Engel, this is the R that you're talking about, that we may be looking at some different measures anyway. So this one might come back with some changes about what measures we're going to be using, so it's not just a state exam.
Yep, we're going to bring back an interim monitoring report that has a lot of different ways to cut the achievement data so that you can get a flavor of what's possible. And then if there's things that the board is interested in including, it'll be an opportunity to change our indicators at that time. It'll be a couple months down the road. We'll still have plenty of time to gather the data and analyze it. So that won't be any issue to change those indicators 3 months from now.
I think that's just a good reminder for the board too, is because, in the past and all along, when we have questions about the results and think maybe the results aren't showing reasonable progress, then someone at the board table will surely say, well, what is reasonable progress?
Yes.
To have folks at the table who are skilled and experienced at data analysis and looking at things differently, like Trevor, that's one thing I always appreciate about you and others at the board table, is that you're more skilled and experienced in that area than I am. So it's no secret I'm not running for re-election, but like for those of you carrying this work forward, I just would encourage everyone to keep looking at more than just the base level, what certain data points are showing us, and dig deeper into the bigger picture of what's going on, and to remember that we don't have to always agree with what reasonable progress is. It is fairly vague. So that's part of the importance of these discussions at the board table, is determining together what we agree is reasonable.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think your point's really important, especially for measuring an R report or result. I think looking at an OE is a different kind of conversation, but I think you're spot on for how we look at the results monitoring.
Any other comments? Yes, Mr. Oliver.
My question is, and maybe this was explained and I missed it in a previous meeting, but how is this data being collected? Is this just an additional kind of questionnaire that students will have to answer as a part of an in-class reflection, or is this a kind of changed curriculum? I probably won't have to deal with this because I'll be gone,
but you have been.
Yes, but my siblings will still have to. And what should kind of the students of La Crosse expect? Is it going to be a change, or is it just going to be a difference in collection?
So one of the concerns that the board has had over the years is not creating new obligations for teachers and students. And so trying to use pre-existing opportunities to gather data. And all of the assessments on the results R2 are pre-existing assessments that we're obligated to do already. So the state tests for Wisconsin Forward test, that the ACT, the pre-ACT, these are tests that are required by the state that our students have to take, you have to take already. And so it's not an additional burden, it's something that you would see naturally, and then we're just taking that data, analyzing it, and reporting it to the school board. Some of the things that we're talking about, I don't know if you've taken iReady, or, so that's an assessment that we use within our school district to help inform teachers on how to modify their practice and help students learn. So that's another assessment that we already use. We're required to use something like that for kindergarten through third grade by law as a part of the achievement gap reduction process. So some of it's already required. Some of it we continue because we find it provides good feedback to teachers to adjust their instruction so that students continue to learn. On the results policy 3, the citizenship one, there are some assessments in there that you might find in an 8th grade social studies class or a 10th grade science class, what we call curriculum-based measures. So it's within the curriculum, it's a special test written by our teachers that we try and implement uniformly across our students. And so every 10th grader will take this test, we'll analyze the results, see how we did year to year. And I think you might have been here when we had that conversation around positionality, social location, under how you understand people around you, social emotional learning. Those are locally crafted tests, not implemented by the state, but locally so that we could assess our own internal goals. And so those are kind of unique additional requirements that we place upon ourselves that students may see. But most of our other sources of information are pre-established, already existing requirements by the state or internally to do good work.
Other questions or comments? Hearing none, then we will move on to the next item on information, the discussion on the proceeds of the sale of Lincoln Middle School. So this is something we started last meeting and we are bringing forward again this meeting. So I guess I'll just open up. Either Dr. Engel, if you want to give some more information, or if anybody wants to start with the conversation.
Yeah, I was super excited by the conversation last meeting, just to kind of start the exploration process of these funds. I learned a little bit more as I investigated some options with Patty, heard some great ideas by school board members on different ways to potentially use these funds. And what I did find was if the funds are allocated into Fund 42, which is like a capital improvement fund, it does not impact our mill rate for the next year. So I think that's historically where we've kind of lodged these funds so that it wouldn't become an issue with tax rates in the following year. So it is a safe place to kind of like store it while decisions are made. But once it goes in there, it stays in there. So that's one of those, the only challenge with that. So some of the other potential uses of these monies, some decisions would have to be made by the sale of the property. And then what I did here was just Aaron's analysis along with our administration, just to kind of think about it in a different way. And I used a process that I've used in other places for kind of a course of action analysis, kind of trying to take a complicated thing and assess it, and just tried to create some up, downs, some plus minuses, some quantification, just trying to do an assessment just to help folks think about this in different ways. And you can agree or disagree, it's just Aaron's assessment. I just wanted to use this as a benchmark to continue the conversation about good ideas about how to approach this issue.
So Ms. Sukla, Dr. Sprague, Ms. Braganski.
Dr. Sprague is on.
That's okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ms. Sukla.
So I just want to be clear, I understood at the last meeting that this money would reduce our state revenue if we were to receive that, and that's why we want to look at how we spend that. I think I'm hearing something different tonight. I want to be clear what I'm understanding.
So I was initially concerned that simply receiving it anywhere would be a problem. I'm thankful to find out that if it goes into the Capital Fund 42, it doesn't create that problem. So that kind of lowers the temperature a little bit.
Okay.
But the board doesn't necessarily want to put it there either. So there is a decision that has to be made about where to put it initially. If you put it into Fund 10, you've got a lot more flexibility with the money. But if it goes into Fund 42, it's kind of captured by that fund for the foreseeable future. So.
What flexibility do we have to ever move it from Fund 42?
Our expert is not here right now. It may incur the same tax liability, so to speak, if we move it out, is my guess. That's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is that there's no flexibility. I know Fund 47 is a fund that was created by the state to give some flexibility, but it has to stay for capital maintenance projects. Once it goes in there, you can't pull it out for other reasons. So I need to verify that, and I will certainly do that, Ms. Sukla. But it was reassuring to me that maybe there's not as much of a, like the temperature's lowered, right? You know, in terms of how to approach things if it goes there. So that was my primary concern with bringing that up.
I guess I was wondering how this receipt of money was different than like if we were to receive like referendum money. I left the conversation last meeting. It was kind of exciting and exhilarating to think about how can we spend money? Because we've never had that discussion here. And I went home, I've thought about it for about a week, and everything we've heard at this table up until this conversation was, we don't have enough money, we don't have enough money, we don't have enough money. We have to consolidate schools because we don't have enough money. And we received budget projections a year ago from Patty showing, and I have copies if anybody, I got a copy of the report that she gave us, anybody wants to see it, showing that we, because of the reduction in number of students, that we will be operating in the next few years in a deficit of $2 to $3 million. So I'm wondering, why are we thinking about how do we want to spend this money knowing we're going to be short $2 or $3 million? This seems, and we've told the whole public, like, we have to consolidate schools because it's the only way we can balance our budget, and until we have the schools consolidated, we continue with the deficit. So it doesn't jive in my mind.
That is a great question, and that is one of the interesting conundrums about like what types of money we have. So the deficit that we had was an ongoing budget deficit. We're spending a little bit more each year than we're bringing in if we continue as we were, because the ongoing revenue does not match our ongoing expenses. So ongoing needs in perpetuity. So like if you give a wage increase to somebody, you can assume they're going to work here for the next 10, 20, 30 years. That's going to be a continual expense every year into the future. And so when we make a change like the consolidation of our schools, what we're doing is we're eliminating ongoing money, that recurring cost, because we're going to end up shrinking our workforce just a little bit in that process. So we're going to cut $2.5 million out of our budget that is recurring costs every single year because of that referendum. And that will address that that projected deficit that we have. So this referendum was incredibly huge for balancing our budget, consolidating our facilities. On occasion, though, we do get one-time money. Could be a grant from the federal government. You know, we got some governor's money a couple years ago that we ended up giving as a bonus to staff because it was kind of unexpected and kind of a boon, and you know, we wanted to do something one time with that. You know, there's money that comes in kind of unanticipated from like unpaid tax receipts in the prior year, and it shows up this year, and now all of a sudden we've got an extra $30,000. You know, we wouldn't spend that $30,000 on hiring a position or a wage increase because it's only here once. And so different types of money. This sale of Lincoln, you know, 2 years ago we were hopeful we would sell it, and we're continuing to be hopeful, and things look ripe. And you know, you can't really plan for it 3 years ago. You kind of gotta hope you get to the end and things are looking good. And so this is a one-time income, a one-time revenue of money. And so it won't alleviate our ongoing budget deficit. It could for a year.
A year until the
It
school
could.
built, yeah.
Yep. But fortunately, the referendum passed, and so our kind of continuing budget deficit, that's going to be relatively well taken care of as we move forward.
Once the schools are built.
Yep, once the schools are built.
We've got a few years, or a couple, year and a half fiscal.
Absolutely, we've got a couple years to get there. And so when you have one-time money, especially of this size, as I think I put in my my memo, like, you get a rare opportunity to do something significant that has a long-term impact, positive impact on our school district. And we could certainly use it to plug the budget deficit and keep our fund balance high, but there's also an opportunity to think about it in more creative ways, in different ways. How do we improve the image of the school district? How do we advance the experience that kids and staff have here? And so that's what I'm excited to think about. It's hard to think about on the heels of talking about deficits, just like you're talking about, Ms. Sukla. But they are two different things, two different types of money that impact our school district in different ways. And that difference is important and hard to grasp sometimes, but important. to think about.
So now Dr. Sprague and then Mr. Bagnesky.
Yep. Sorry, now I've got a couple of things to bring in. So if I'm understanding everything correctly, the one-time infusion of funds from the sale of Lincoln, if we were to apply it to the budget deficit in 1 year, for example, essentially that would just be going into our fund balance to maintain that fund balance at a particular level, right?
That's correct.
And so, because in this planning process, that the passage of the referendum gave us the budgeting certainty that we needed to be able to extend past the existing deficits to a brighter and better future,
Yep.
right? Okay. Would the one-time allocation of the funds to Fund 42, would it be able to, I think Ms. Sukla's question at the last discussion was about the cost of moving Hogan to Central and the construction projects and everything. Is that where the money would need to be in order to defray those costs?
It could be in Fund 10 or Fund 42. Either
Okay.
place would allow for capital maintenance.
And then the flexibility of Fund 10 is where we have these opportunities to think about auditoriums, about public-facing facilities, about...
The flexibility of Fund 10 would be things like wages,
Okay.
bonuses, programmatic materials, if we wanted a bunch of reading materials, say. The capital maintenance in Fund 42 would be anything that involves building or repairing things.
So that would be the opportunity for some of these facilities investments.
Correct. It could just be held there without being spent for periods of time. It could be spent slowly on, a series of projects, or it could be spent on a dramatic improvement, a range of things.
Do we know how long we just keep it in Fund 42?
I don't think there's any, there's no sunset there. It's just a matter of the will of the board and prudent use of fiscal resources, so, if it's there 6 months, 6 years, 60 years.
So I do want to jump in. Mr. Bagnesky was next.
Well, I want to go back to what I said at the previous meeting, and that is, I really would encourage us to use the money in terms of solar or green energy or whatever, because we put it into that, and then we get money back in terms of savings of energy costs. And so that would be a long-term gain. And we were talking last time, two people mentioned that could we use it for salaries? Well, if we had more money in the budget, we could then improve fringe benefits or whatever, because we spend less in this other pocket over here. And then to follow up on what you said last time in regard to the seats at Central High School auditorium, and I trust you, but at the same time, seeing it firsthand, some of those seats are kind of ragged.
I was there last night, and there was a roll in the carpet about that high that people kept tripping over. And I know I'm not a small person, but I had to sit like this. It's old and built for the size we were in the 1920s.
Yeah, I think what I appreciate about this memo is that it does show that we have a few more opportunities for deciding what we're going to do if and when that sale is done versus where we thought we were at the last board meeting. So I think that is a positive, and that gives us a little bit more time to decide how we proceed. So, Mr. Manka.
I see we have a lot of interesting ideas of how to spend it. We all board have different ideas of how to go forward with this too. We're coming out of a referendum. The community supported us spending our money towards, it's not a reoccurring fund, but to a very expensive project, of course, building schools. My question is there any way that which we can help relieve some of that burden from our taxpayers and just maybe give them a little bit of a break, or maybe not fully, but partially? Maybe we can allocate half of this just to helping with our new building. And maybe I'm not understanding this correctly, that we cannot put this into that fund. But I appreciate the effort that we're talking about how to improve the schools, but I also am kind of curious, how can we kind of relieve some of this burden from the referendum?
Yeah, we're fortunate as a school district that we've had prudent fiscal management for many years, and our mill rate's actually been declining consistently over time and dropped over 70 cents this year as well. So the per capita impact of our school operations has gone down consistently over 30 years for our taxpayers, which is a really nice opportunity that we have. And our community came out strong in support of this, even knowing the mill rate impact at 61% approval, and it's awesome that we have such great community support, even when they know it might increase their taxes a little bit. And so that is fantastic. Tax relief is always an option. You know, you can under levy if you want to. We have had so few resources in our school district for so many years. And I know when you go to linkages, you hear about the needs that our teachers have. And, you know, to under levy, to not expend the limited resources we have, I'd be nervous about what our school community would say if that were the case. Well, like, great, I appreciate, like, taking care of our taxpayers who've taken care of us. But I know that their support is strong in our community over multiple referenda. And I think systemically, as a school board, you've done a good job of focusing on the right things, keeping our mill rate on the right trajectory. Not using these funds for the benefit of kids, I think that would be a hard sell for some in our community.
I think something to consider as well is that these funds will be used to make changes within the school district. But for these funds, we would still be asking the taxpayers to pay for that as well. So in some respects, we are reducing the impact to the taxpayer because these funds will be used within the school district, and because of that, we're not asking the taxpayers for more for those same projects.
You make a good
Mr.
point.
Newmeister?
Thank you. I agree that the windfall is exciting because it doesn't happen, and we are in a position where we are able to do something that probably wouldn't be done, or if it would be for quite some time, it'd be a long time from here, you know. So it is, but I think it's also reassuring to know that if we put it in Fund 42 or wherever we stick it, it does not need to be done within a year or something. It's reassuring to me. And I can say something, well, we're talking about school auditoriums. I've recently been in both Holman's and Onalaska, this just Saturday for the Miss Onalaska pageant. Oh boy, it's night and day difference between La Crosse and both of those schools. It's kind of embarrassing, to be honest with you. That doesn't even compare. So obviously we have a lot of things we could do with it, and as long as we just work together and do what we think is best, I think that's the main thing. But like I said, I'm happy to see that we can stick it in a fund that doesn't have to be spent like right away.
Yeah, I think it gives the board time to like grapple with the question and think of the right thing and explore what needs to be explored. You know, I do know that the board, every year when we talk about open enrollment, you know, that's a concern. We're losing a few more kids than we're bringing in. You know, the positive impression of our school district has been on folks' minds over the last year or two. You know, and it's not a keeping up with the Joneses, but it may be investing in our amazing kids and programs who do great things every single day. You know, whether it's drama or orchestra or show choir, FBLA, you know, who are presenting in these spaces. There's an opportunity to show off our school district a little bit, because the average community member does not get into an English classroom and see the amazing instruction going on. They show up at a football game, they show up at a band concert, they show up at a show choir competition, and you've seen the difference between other places and ours. And their impression of our school district is formed by that public-facing facility.
Yeah. Mr. Olson?
I was actually just going to kind of bring up once again, you kind of mentioned it before I was able to, but in addition to public-facing facilities, public-facing institutions as well, we talk a lot about wanting to attract students and wanting to attract the positive attention of the public. And I think a great way to do that, that's been gaining traction, is student initiative and student involvement. And sometimes when we spend a lot of time thinking, what do we want to do with this? It's best to ask the people who this money would be going to and to give them the opportunity. And so I just kind of want to once again put in my 2 cents that giving, I think, school programs, whether it is drama or it is sports or it is something brand new, the opportunity to thrive with kind of like grant money, having students write their own grants would be super cool.
Thank you. Other comments?
I'm curious to find out, I don't know a ton about solar, but I'm wondering, like, how much solar could that amount of money buy us, and what cost savings would that result in? And would the cost savings be significant enough that it could help us address
a remodel of the theater facility sooner than we would
You
have.
mentioned me the other day about it was safe.
So I'll try and give some ballpark estimates, and we got an expert in the crowd here, Jeff Elson's here. He is our solar expert. So when we did the Hamilton edition, we put on a 100 megawatt system, or kilowatt, and it produces about $30,000 in savings annually is what our estimate is right now. And that 100 megawatt system is about the largest you can put on right now under regulations and like the payback that you get from the electric companies. So that's kind of the size that we're designing. And unfortunately, it's based on like, zip code or address or meter. And so it doesn't matter if it's on Hamilton or Central, that's about the largest we can construct at this time. And the only reason we've been able to do solar so far is because of an incredible partnership with Solar on La Crosse Schools. They have done an amazing job securing grants, doing fundraising, and Jeff has been great working with them on these projects. And so we've been able to do Northside, we've been able to do Hamilton, we're doing overhead thing at Summit. It'll be a little bit smaller than the 100 that we're talking about. We're in the process of doing one on Southern Bluffs. Jeff's gonna outstrip me here pretty quickly.
How much
We have one at Polytechnic.
How much does it cost for 100 kilowatt?
And that's why Mr. Elson is here.
Hi there, everyone. So we're doing a pergola at Summit Elementary. It's an outdoor classroom. It's going to have about 50-some panels on it, and where it'll have where the rain won't come through it. It'll actually run off, and it'll be facing at an angle. So that's hopefully going to be finished up by January, and then we're looking at doing Southern Bluffs. We got 3 bids in from Solar Connection, Olson Solar, and Ethos out of Rockville. So looking at getting those bids in, and once we...
What's the typical cost of that size system?
Like Northside, I want to say it was, like for instance, right now at Southern Bluffs, we're looking anywhere from 70,000 to 120 to, for the array that would go up there. So
100 kilowatt?
yeah.
Yes.
But that's just for the array, that's not including installation, et cetera, correct?
It is including
does.
installation. Yes. Yeah.
And we're
Yeah.
fortunate there's tax credits which help make it a little bit cheaper. We've provided some funds as a school district, but most of the funds have been fundraised externally through these partnerships. Joe's in the middle of working on a climate action plan, with community members that identifies, solar as an opportunity as well. When we put the addition onto State Road, as well as when we build a new elementary school, solar will be a part of those projects as well. The limitation at this point is where we have roofs or certainty that a building's going to be around for 15 years. So we need good roofs that can support a plan. So we usually want to change out the roofing material before we put in the solar. And we want some certainty that the building's going to be there in 15 years so that we can capture the investment as long as possible there. We're about to wrap up our elementary schools, frankly, and then we'll be looking at middle schools and high schools. And so the total cost of that, let's say it averages $100,000, it's about, $400,000, $500,000 left in terms of projects, with a potential savings being around $100,000, $120,000, maybe $150,000 a year, which is perpetuity, in perpetuity is, so that's an advantage as well. So it wouldn't necessarily need to be the whole 2.1 million. I'll also say that it's been a part of our process to continue to work with Souls. We have a plan to get there kind of outside of this particular lump sum of money, so you can be confident that we will continue to pursue it. It would happen a lot faster if we just did it all at once.
Yeah, and some people on some of those committees that I serve on are not that happy with the school district because they say, we're doing all the work and where's their interest in this project? And so that's what I hear from some of the spokespeople.
Any other questions or comments regarding the proceeds on Lincoln Middle School, Mr. Olson?
Hi again. One interesting thing about solar is it's not necessarily solar that attracts, but the environmental consciousness of the action. And so one thing that I'd kind of also encourage is maybe not jumping into solar, but utilizing some of our other natural resources to derive, whether it's energy, heat, or even just investing in kind of outdoor experiences for our students. I don't know, because solar is tricky. One year you can spend quite a bit of money on it, and then the next they'll come out with a huge new innovation that could have saved us quite a bit. But yeah, I do really like solar. It's pretty cool. But also there's a lot of other amazing options that I think La Crosse has a unique ability to tap into. But solar is kind of just the flashiest.
Good point. Any other comments?
My energy, I have solar and heat pump, and my energy cost per month is around $33.
That's wonderful.
Any other comments from the board? Okay. Hearing none, then we'll move on to announcements, and we will turn it over to Mr. Olson first for the student representatives.
In the whole week since I kind of last announced, nothing too exciting has happened, which is good. Things are still happy, things are still chugging along, and students are still learning.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Ms. Nelson.
Yeah, I could say similar things. Not too much has changed. All of the concerts that I was talking about were successful. I've heard good things. And I guess everybody's just still excited for winter break. Next week is kind of when we get the holiday stuff going up. We got dress up days all day, or every day for the next week. And then there's going to be some holiday music performances like the jazz band in the Commons before school, and I think the jazz band and the orchestra and possibly the choir also as well at the winter assembly, which is usually a good time, games and stuff. So yeah, just good time until break.
Good. Thank you very much. I know Mr. Badneski had mentioned not much to report from CISA 4. Anything you just want to add quickly?
No, the only thing we talked about was budget numbers, this making it, they're self-funding their health insurance company, and they're trying to wage whether that was a good way to go or not, but I don't know if anybody's interested in all that.
I appreciate it. Ms. Birkenau?
Just a reminder that the grant award luncheon for La Crosse Public Education Foundation is coming up in the blink of an eye, January 17th. So mark your calendars if you haven't already. It would be great to have a strong representation from our board there. It's a super fun time. Great meal. There's always a snowstorm that day.
Keep the tradition alive, right?
Yeah.
All right, the only announcements I have is Sunday, January 5th for the board members. There is a First Sunday Forum / coffee hour from 10 to 11 at Our Redeemer Lutheran Church. So anybody who's interested to attend would be encouraged to attend. And then Tuesday, February 4th from 6 to 9, we will be having a workshop regarding policies, and depending on how long that conversation lasts, if it's a shorter one, maybe we could delve into linkages and talking about linkages and the kind of the summary of linkages. Up to that point, we will not have completed all of the linkages, but at least we would have a good place to begin the conversation and go from there. So that'll be, again, Tuesday, February 4th, 6 to 9. So please make sure to mark that on your calendar. That will be an important meeting for all of us to attend. I'll turn it over to Dr. Engel.
Winter break is December 3rd through January 1st, December 24th, 25th, 31st, and January 1st, the board offices are closed, but we will be in and staffing our district offices the rest of the time. We had the news had just come out last week about Act 10 being overturned by a judge in Dane County. This is one of those things that could have a sea change in how we operate as a school district, and so I just wanted to give a brief update. The brief update is wait and see. The judge still hasn't made a judgment in terms of so he overturned it on the basis of an entire rationale, but he hasn't said what's going to happen, what ought to happen next. And once that judgment is put forth, the legislature has already indicated that they're going to appeal and ask for a stay of that judgment. So it is also likely that until it is appealed and gone to probably the Supreme Court in the state, that it will likely not be in effect until it's been ruled upon. There's a Supreme Court election in spring, and so the various parties will be maneuvering to think about, are we satisfied with this court, or do we want to roll the dice on the next court? And so that'll kind of determine the pacing of this whole endeavor as well. In the very short term, there could be some opportunities, but our legal counsel has said just wait for the judgment, wait for the inevitable stay, and then wait for the appeal to go through the process, and could be resolved in 60 days to 6 years. So stay tuned. But if we go back to more comprehensive bargaining, it will kind of dramatically change the landscape of how we do business here in the school district of La Crosse. So I just wanted to give you all an update on that. And then the only other thing is we're entering the biennium budget season. So the state departments like DPI have produced their budgets and shared those with the governor. The governor conducted a budget hearing last week. Thank you for the attendees. Mr. Alberts was there, as well as some prospective board members. So that was an interesting opportunity to kind of engage in that process. Governor Evers will put together his budget and present that to the legislature. If history plays out as it has, the legislature will almost surely reject that budget and then start from scratch themselves, producing their own. And then it'll be a negotiation between the legislature and the governor leading up to July 1st. In the meantime, we will have a series of budget hearings, probably in the March, April timeframe. And I have testified at those the last couple of bienniums. I intend to continue to encourage folks there. And if any school board member is interested and wants to be a part of that process, it usually takes a whole day to kind of manage the whole thing. But great opportunity for public advocacy, to talk to the state legislature, to have our voice heard. And it's been a valuable process. So that's kind of what we can anticipate with the budget process over the next 6-7 months. Hopefully, it's all wrapped up by July 1. The circumstances of our politics right now indicate it may go longer than July 1, as it has in some years. When the government is less severely divided, when it's a little bit closer, it's harder to come to an agreement. So education funding is a third of state funding, so it's a big part of the line item, so it'll be an interesting process, both between Act 10 and the biennium, and I'll keep you updated along the way.
Sounds good. We'll move on to board debriefing, which falls to me this evening. So, I really appreciate whenever we have a school showcase to be able to talk about what are students doing, how are they doing it, the cool things that are going on, the amazing things our faculty and our staff and employee groups are doing. So I think that that's really important and really valuable overall. I do think that we should consider how we proceed forward in terms of continue our conversations. I think we have robust conversations. I think our conversations at the board table are definitely good, thoughtful questions. But again, one of the things to remind the board, including myself, is that the goal has always been that 50% of the board meeting is spent on student achievement. And so I would encourage all of us to think back on our last board meetings and determine whether 50% of each of those board meetings has been about student achievement. And if it hasn't, how can each one of us help all the board together get to that goal? Because that's really the most important part of the work that we do, is that student achievement. So I think that's all we had for board debriefing. Yes. What I have on here is board debriefing me at the bottom, if you look. So,
but he's on December 9th
yeah,
as well.
so that was a change. But Mr. Menka, you could also chime in if you'd like.
Yeah, I could chime in. I think we have kind of the usher some of the same points. I think we have a lot of good discussions about it. I agree about you have student achievement, but one thing I always think about is remember that we serve everybody else. I think we did really well when we examined our own ideas of how to spend the money from the Lincoln Middle School. We were able to boost a lot of good ideas there. Another thing I think we could improve upon is be aware that the referendum did pass. We're trying to work through the process of how to move forward from here. We're going to have some disagreements. The biggest thing that was only really the major concern I had from today's board meeting was about Bray, and that we seem to have had a misunderstanding about who we're serving, either it be the public or administration. I just want to kind of impress upon the board that it's really all a team. At the end of the day, the public and administration did vote on this referendum. We are here to serve them as well. So that's just one thing to work together, is just make sure keeping all of them informed and all of them at our mind when it comes to how to move forward, by making sure that we're going through after this referendum, not only keeping our accountability, but also keeping that forward reaching. But Thank you again, Mr. Gimenez.
Yeah, appreciate it. So with that, we are adjourned. Let's take a 5-minute break and then come back for our workshop. And then if I could speak to the 2 student representatives in the meantime, I appreciate it. So we'll be back in about 5 minutes.